I want to welcome everyone again to the Orange County chapter of Sisters in Crime. I'm Barbara DeMarco-Barrett. I'm the president of the chapter, and we'd love to know where all of you are from, and if you're a Sisters in Crime member. So you could put that in the chat if you're so inclined. And also the chat is where you should put your questions, ask your questions of Jeff. Keep your audio on mute, please. And this recording will go on our YouTube page channel in a week or so. And if you want to find that and you want to find previous events, go to sistersincrimeoc.com and click on, I think the tab is past meetings, past events, something like that. And you will go to YouTube and see our events, and this one will join them. Many of you know Jeff, but for those of you who don't, T. Jefferson Parker has published more than 24 novels. His novel, Silent Joe, was an Edgar Award winner for the best mystery. It also won at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books, or the book prize for that year too. 1,000 Steps is Jeff's 27th novel. And if you're moved to buy Jeff's new book or any of his books, or any books at all, really, try to shop at independent booksellers. It's the only way we're going to keep them in business. Book Carnival is a shop here in Orange County that carries his work, as well as many bookshops. Lee Child said, might be Parker's crowning achievement. And it has just the best cover ever. Anyway, Jeff, thank you for being here. And
thank you.
Let's start with you talking about 1,000 Steps and how the book came about.
Okay, happy to. Thanks for all coming out and being here. Hi, Pat Bresky. Haven't seen you in a while. Always good to see your face. How the book came about, 1,000 Steps. Well, I'll tell you. It was kind of it came time for me to write a book because I'd finished up the fourth of this little series I was writing about Roland Ford, who's a PI in San Diego. And it was time to write another book. And I didn't really want to write a fifth Roland Ford book. I wanted to write something else, but I wasn't really sure why or what. And this happened during, I made this realization. I finished that last book and I had the realization that I was not going to write another Roland Ford, but I needed to write something in March of 2020, which is to say the height of the first COVID lockdown. And as March reared its ugly head and the days went by and I started thinking about what kind of book I was going to write, I just kind of got loster and loster. And I think I finally kind of escaped into my own imagination in a way and tried to get away from the terrible headlines and what was going on in New York and all that. And I started to reminisce and think about the old days in Laguna Beach when I first discovered that place, particularly 1968, the summer of 1968, when I was 14 years old. And I was just a little buck-toothed suburban kid growing up over the hill from Laguna in Tustin. And we used to go to our moms to take us down to Laguna and drop us off, me and my friends, my brother, my sister sometimes. And we would body surf and we would go to the Taco Bell and we'd, sort of peek in the galleries and stick your head into Mystic Arts World and just kind of, I experienced that crazy summer of '68 as just such a boy, and the hippies and the clothes and the hair, the smells, the marijuana everywhere, the drug deals going down, the crazy music that was coming out. Everybody seemed to have some sort of a 4-track or an 8-track thing in their car, and there's always blasting this crazy music. And again, I was just a kid. And I took all that in though with a real eager eyes and senses, eyes and ears and all. And as I started thinking about that time during the first part of that COVID lockdown, those memories for some reason just became more and more vivid, more and more specific, and they kept coming up more. I didn't realize that I had recorded so much of that time, so many of the things that ended up in the book. And I thought, I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back in time, and I'm gonna write about 1968 through the eyes of in the book he's 16, but it's me as a 14-year-old sort of, relaying those sights and those sounds. And I've always been skeptical of the term escapist literature when applied to, applied to writers. And I always thought that, to be called a writer of escapist fiction is kind of a put down. And I realized as I escaped literally from 2020 to 1968 that I was not just going to write escapist fiction. I was living escapist fiction. So anyway, Laguna Beach in 1968 rescued me from COVID in 2020 is kind of the long short answer to how the book came about.
So I'm curious about the fact that this was a more personal project for you. I don't know if it was more personal than any other books that you've written, but how did that affect the process of writing it, that you were at that time? I mean, you spent time in Laguna Beach during the time that you ended up writing about, and had a personal relationship with Laguna Beach. You've lived in Laguna Beach. Yeah.
I had awfully, there's not much gap between Matt Anthony, the character of this book, and me, and people I know closely, such as my brother, who's also named Matt. For me, for example, for me to sit down and write about my last book previous to this, the Roland Ford series, to write about a 30-something private eye working in San Diego. Well, I can do that. And I have done that, and I've written characters, different genders and different ages all over the state of California and more. But there was just very little that I didn't understand about Matt before I wrote the first sentence of the book, because he's kind of based on me and my observations and my kind of what would you say, opinionless but very attentive view of what was going on around me in 1968. So I felt like I was on comfortable ground the whole way, and I put a lot of characteristics into him that are mine, and also my brothers and friends of mine and stuff. So I've just felt familiar. I've never written a book with a protagonist who's 16, never done it, not even close. And I wanted to write a Bildungsroman forever. I think reading about young people, I've read so many good coming of age novels in the past couple of decades. I always go, yeah, I want to try that someday, and it dovetailed perfectly with my flashbacks, whatever, of 1968. It was just so easy to call on myself and sort of chart my own growth through the course of the book. So yeah, it's personal. It's personal, and as a writer, that when you're writing fiction, every single character you put in there is a part of you. It just is. That's who you give birth to it. Her or him, and no different in this book. It was just a lot easier. It was just a lot easier to do because I think my memories and senses at that time were so alive. I think a 14-year-old, 16-year-old kid has wonderful senses and yet almost no perspective. So you can't really judge what you're seeing. You don't know how to vet it, but you record it, and so it was easy to call on that as a writer.
Do you do character biographies, or do you have photos of fictional photos of who you think your characters are to keep you with them, to continue to remind you who they are? Do you do that sort of thing?
Yeah, I do. I keep a running kind of biography of each main big character in my books as I write, and as they grow from page 1 on, I add to the biography, and the biographies are typically at the end of the file that I go to. I just hit end, and then I find whatever character I'm trying to say something about, and I'll add on, something that he's done or she's done that's important or telling, and I'm a sucker for pictures too. I remember one time I wrote a 3-book trilogy about an Orange County detective named Mercy Rayborn.
Oh yeah.
And, and I remember early on in the hatching of her, I described her. I had her in my head kind of, but I was browsing a catalog. I think it's one of those typical like fishing catalogs, or probably an Orvis catalog or something that I seem to get 10 of every week. And there was a picture. I think it was just for her blouse and her whatever. It was a picture of this statuesque, beautiful, dark-haired woman with a Nito sweater. Look like she's on a boat or something, on a yacht. She's kind of breezing up, and the hair's in winds in her hair and stuff. And she's got this really excellently cool looking pair of Ray-Ban aviators on, you know, she looks like a CHP officer, but she's a supermodel too, you know. And so I cut that out and put it on my wall right here and tacked it up. And that became my template for the Mercy character. So whenever she walked on stage, I would glance at that and I would go, yeah, this is who's doing the talking now. So I like that. I like that. And there's another really cool one recently I used. It was I wrote a character in the very last Roland Ford book. It was called Then She Vanished, and the antagonist in the story is an Afghan war vet who has lost one of his legs from the knee down, and he's a politician, and he's a strong guy, and he's smart, and he's handsome, and I got a picture of him from a catalog too, and it was a man a soldier who'd come back and lost half his leg, and he was really good looking and charismatic in the face and stuff, and he was a model. He was modeling something. I don't know what it was, but so I bagged him, and I put him on the wall too as something to look at.
So tell me more about these character biographies. I mean, are you working on these as you go along, or do you do a lot of work on who the major players are before you get started?
I kind of do it as I go, Barbara. Kind of do it as I go, and you know, each time a character walks on stage, if you will, I would, you know, first page, and here's, for example, you know, Mad Anthony riding his bike. You know, all the things that are happening in that scene. You know, the police and the surfers looking out at this girl who's washed up on the beach, and everything that happens in that scene and in that chapter, I know I'm going to have to account for later. You know, that's him, and I'm going to have to make him true, and that is going to have to be Matt, and Matt can't just willy-nilly change from one scene to the next, you know. So each time they come on, I try to get deeper and more truthful into what's going on. One of the biography things that just other writers might be interested in, and you probably do the same thing, is I find it just confounding sometimes to write a 500-page manuscript and try to keep birthdays and how old people are and Wednesday from Friday, you know, straight, all the technical, factual, biographical stuff, you know. And now I've found myself, you know, one page she's got brown eyes, and the next page they're hazel, and you know, so all that kind of stuff I write down, especially birthdays, because if you try to set the book in a recognizable year, which I generally do, then the dates and the days have to track. You know, you can't have October the 28th be a Friday in this year that you're writing about, when in fact it was a Tuesday. So all that kind of stuff has to go in, and yeah, the characters are a part of that. But then again, you know, the thing that's cool and difficult and wonderful about characters in a novel is that in most of them, all the big ones usually, they really do change. You know, that coming of age is a perfect 3 words to describe Mad Anthony in 1,000 Steps, because he's not the same person on page 350 of the printed book that he is on page 1 when he's riding his bike, you know. And his change is at the heart of the book. It's one of the dynamic things of the book. It's just as interesting in my eye, and as you know, the fate of his sister, and whether they're ever going to find out what happened to her, you know. So this change, I think, is really fun, and it's really exciting. And again, when he comes on to a stage in on stage in the second chapter, you know, he's changing, he's moving, he's growing, and I'm trying to keep up with his development, you know. And one of the funnest things to do in 1,000 Steps was to chart his physical growth, you know. It's mainly about his emotional and psychological and his maturity of becoming 16 and onward towards, you know, being a man. But you know, concomitant with that is you know, his physical changes and stuff, you know. And as we intercept Matt on, you know, chapter 1, he's chronically hungry. He's going through an unimaginably big growth spurt that he doesn't understand even what it is. Halfway through the book, he realizes, he does some measurements, he gets on the scale that he used to use all the time. He realizes he's gained 20 pounds in like 6 weeks, and he's gained, you know, 2 inches of height in less than 6 months, and he's just getting bigger and bigger. His clothes don't fit, his shoes are tight, he's always starved. He's always hungry. He's always hungry. So charting his hunger throughout the course of the book was really interesting. And of course, as a fisherman, as an angler, especially who fished down in Laguna quite a lot. I thought, I got to get a fishing scene into this book. Matt's going to be he's going to be a fisherman, darn it. I want to get a little bit of, Fishers of Men in there, and I want to get a little bit of Hemingway in there, and I want him to be a fisherman. And I realized when I had him going down, I realized before I wrote the big fishing scene in that book is that the reason that he fishes is not because it's not for sport. He fishes because he's hungry, and that's one of the ways that he puts food on the table for himself and his mom, who's kind of got her own problems. And so, yeah, the physical changes and the psychological changes and all that good biographical stuff it's at the heart of the story, I think, in a way. And I think that's why it was interesting for me. A fully mature character, protagonist like Roland Ford, for instance, or Tom Shepard in Laguna Heat, or whatever, 30-something person. I mean, they may or may not, have changes or whatever, but they're pretty much open books by then, and Matt's not. We have no real idea what the future is going to hold for Matt, and he's much more of a puzzle than he is a known entity that I just have to describe.
Well, plus, there's all these hills in Laguna Beach, and he's biking all over the place, and you would get hungry doing this, right?
I got hungry writing those scenes. Rita, my wife, said that yesterday. She goes, well, I was thinking about that scene in the book where Matt's so hungry that he's doing this or whatever. She goes, I think I was hungry the whole time I read that book,
Well, talk about blending fact with fiction, because, Timothy Leary's in your book. I mean, you're dealing with some factual things that were going on at that time in Laguna Beach. And, how much license do you give yourself to embellish what really happened? I mean, because it's fiction, right? So how beholden are you to the facts?
Yeah, well, not very, to tell you the truth. When I employ or deploy a real person such as Timothy Leary onto the pages of my fiction, I'm as careful as I can be not to depict him in any way that wasn't him. I try to be as truthful to his life and his words and his writings as I could. And so when the truth is there, then you must adhere. But the easy way around that for the novelist, of course, is you just invent a guy, and his name isn't Timothy Leary, it's Nathan Theobald, and he's an LSD guru from Harvard, and then you just write fiction. But I like putting in the real stuff. I like putting in the real streets. And if there's a big swashbuckling character like Timothy Leary, spouting off at the mystic arts world and inviting people to take acid and stuff, I want it. And if there's this grizzled old man from the old world named Eiler Larson, also known as the Greeter, who would just stand on the corners in Laguna and wave at cars and tourists all day, every day. I saw him a million times. I had to put him in there. So yeah, I gotta remain as true as I can to things, but I will also. For example, okay, Mystic Arts World plays a big part in this book. A lot of really important scenes take place there, and the characters who run that place and who habituate that place, like Matt, they're all fictional characters except for Leary, who's there one night doing a lecture. Matt and these other people that I invent are kind of composites of people who would go there. So I have on one hand the factual mystic arts world, and then I have on the other hand it's bustling with these characters who I've invented. So that's a good example of using a real truth or a real setting, and then kind of changing it for your purposes, which I freely admit to doing a lot.
Mm. Maddie had a question about something you talked about earlier, and she said, did any revelations or insights about your past arise during the process of writing this book?
Revelations or insights into my past?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. No, I don't surprise myself. I know my age. I don't have any real surprises. The one overriding thing that I surprised myself with in the writing of this book was the level of detail and experience that was in my memory. As I mentioned before, that psychedelic underworld of Laguna Beach was fascinating to me for reasons that I didn't even really fully understand why. But I just sensed that one, the world is changing around me. People don't dress like that. People don't have hair like that. People don't talk like that. And this kind of music is brand new to me, stuff like that. I sensed that things were changing, and I didn't know what my place would be in that future world. So flash forward again back to 2020 when I first started writing this book. The ferocity and the detail that came back to me was very, very, very surprising. And so I don't know if I learned anything about myself, but I certainly did surprise myself with the newsreel that I'd been recording for all that time.
So talk a little bit about choosing a third person present tense. What went into deciding that voice?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. I think the third person present tense gives this book a large amount of its charm and its pixie dust. And I'd never written a whole book in that fashion before. I've written third person, of course, a lot, and a little bit parts and chapters and sections in the present tense, but I'd never just given myself over to one single viewpoint character, a third person voice and a first person and a present tense presentation, and so it felt right, it sounded right to me, and I felt that present tense was and is when just a wonderful way to grab a reader and to put that reader in the story in a really generous kind of open way. It's not remembered, it's presented, and I think that's really really cool. Again, I've been reading a lot of I've read a lot of, the present tense is real popular in fiction these days, the past couple of decades anyway. And I've just read so many of them that are good, it made me want to kind of try that on. And I wrote that first chapter several, different ways to try to get the mix and the voice and the tense and everything right. And when I tried that present tense, solely seen over the shoulder and through the thoughts of Matt, that clicked for me, and it just felt instinctively right to carry that through. And I think one of the things that gives this book kind of a lurching forward, headlong kind of pace is that present tense. It just moves you from one very focused, intense scene to another one. And not a whole lot happens up here in Matt. We know his thoughts and all, but basically he's doing something in every scene. And when you write that in a present tense, it can just really be fun to read and fun to write.
So we are back. It's 2 weeks later. The first half of this interview took place 2 weeks ago, and then we were Zoom bombed, and it kind of disturbed the whole thing. And Jeff was nice enough to come back and continue the interview, and it was kind of crazy. If you've never been Zoom bombed, it's a little insane, would you say?
Yeah, it was quite a surprise. I'm glad we can do round two and not let the bad guys win.
Me too. I don't think we'll be Zoom bombed today. But what we were talking about when that happened was I had asked you to go back to the beginning of your publishing career, which was Laguna Heat. And because I remember, we've talked a bunch of times, and you said that you rewrote it many times in different voices before you found your voice for the novel. And you wrote it on typewriter, and borrowed the typewriter. You were working as a journalist. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, those were great years. I had just started working at the Newport Ensign newspaper right down near where you live. It was Corona Del Mar, Coast Highway. and I was recently out of college. I think I was 25 years old, maybe. And um, I got a job as a newspaper reporter there, and I was covering all sorts of different stuff for this little paper. I covered City Hall and you know, education. I covered arts and books and cops, everything, you know, that a young reporter does. And I wanted to be, what I really wanted to be at that point in my life, though, was a novel writer, or working my way towards it. So every day after work, when it hit 5 o'clock on the clock on the wall in front of me, I would grab my typewriter and a little stack of paper, typing paper, and wrap the cord around the paper to hold it to the typewriter, and then take the typewriter home. And after work, after dinner, I'd work on my novel. And that went on for years and years until I was no longer a reporter and was working for an aerospace company in Newport Beach called Ford Aeroneutronic. Yeah. And so during those 5 years, I wrote the book 5 times. And each time that I wrote it, it came out in the voices of the heroes that I had in my mind. You know, I had a draft of bad Hemingway, and a draft of bad Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and a draft of bad Jim Harrison, year after year after year. And finally, after 5 of those, I made a deal with myself, and I said, write this thing one more time if you can, and try to do it in your own voice, and just ban all hero voices. You know, don't sound like them. If it sounds like them, then get rid of it. Don't write it, you know. Or actually think about it ahead of time, because this was back in the days of typewriters, you know, so you couldn't just delete something. You had to tape it out, all that kind of stuff. So it taught you to think ahead, you know. So anyway, I spent another year 6 writing that book, and I finished the draft, and I read it at the end, and I was finally, the first time, I was really stoked and really happy to see that I'd written a book in my own voice. It was just wonderful, you know. It wasn't, I knew it wasn't a great book, but it was a pretty good book, and it was all me. I wasn't me trying to channel these heroes of mine, you know. So my advice to young writers or aspiring writers is to, you know, enjoy and indulge and immerse yourself in your heroes until it's time to write, and then do your best to forget about them and proceed with your own tone of voice. So that was a little bit about, you know, kind of how I went about it. And I was really surprised to see how much the book changed and grew over those 6 drafts. You know, that's a long time. 6 years is a long time to work on one story. And so that story really evolved. It changed a lot from when I began, you know, draft 1 to when I finished draft 6. And then I rewrote it again for my editor after it was sold. So a lot of work went into that. And I think that, you know, if anything is instructional for beginning writers, young writers, it's don't be afraid to do that, and realize that it will take you time to write, to get your book the way you want it. It's not always going to take 6 years. I know writers who have done it in 6 months, but it can take time, and so be prepared for it, and learn to enjoy it.
Do you remember how you found your voice, though? I mean, you know, was it a matter of reading aloud? Was it a matter of word choice? Was it a matter of what? You know, I mean, because we're so influenced by our heroes and what we read. Can you go into that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. I think you know, to me, when I read, and I think when most people read, especially fiction, there's a rhythm, and there's a music to the voice, to the language. You know, music's the wrong word, but there is something as distinctive and as unmistakable as the melody of a pop hit. You know, everybody knows what, you know, she loves you, yeah, 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 sounds like. And a piece of writing will have something that distinctive in it if you're reading it carefully enough. So I think for me, as a reader, I fell in love with those writers because they had the kind of music that I like. It was just kind of a thing with your ear, you know, or your brain, you know, and so copying, like just take for an example, Raymond Chandler. I should have included, I had a draft of bad Raymond Chandler, all mystery writers do. You know, and his voice and his attitude his music is so loud on the page. It's so unmistakably him. It's so hard to take your eyes off it and your ears off it, because it's so strong and it's so distinct and it's so him. So I think one of the things that I tried to do after 5 frustrating years of copying my heroes was I just, like I said, I quit trying to say something that they would say, and I tried to say it my own way. And I remember right very first sentence of the book. I mean, perfect example. I sat down to write draft 6, and I knew that I was going to write only in my own tone of voice. That's all I had. So I started cobbling together the first sentence, and I worked on that first sentence all the way from morning till lunch. I think it was on a weekend. I worked hours and hours pushing this. I had the basic sentence in my head. I blurted it out. Looked good, sounded good. I thought it had all the nice qualities that a opening sentence should. And I played around with it, moving commas and clauses and all that kind of jazz. And finally, at I don't know, 4 hours after that, I had a sentence that I recognized because of all the listening that I'd done to all these people, great writers and less. I realized that I had something that I'd never read before. I go, oh, this is interesting. This doesn't sound like any of those guys. Doesn't sound like anybody I've ever read. So it must be mine, And so I kind of just eliminated the obvious and tried to go with that. And then as soon as I had that first sentence down, it was a good first sentence, and I liked it. And I thought, that I'm gonna clone the rest of this book, the next 500 manuscript pages. I'm going to clone directly from that that sentence, and I did. I grew it. It's like I had the genome down or something, and I could recreate, or I could create this thing based on the DNA of that sentence. And again, that goes back to your ear and what you've read. And your memory, I guess, and another thing that I always advise, writers, young and older who are starting is to read up, read the good guys, so that you're filling your head and your ears with these wonderful, sentences. And I think that's how you learn. I'm just, as a semi-irrelevant aside, I'm three quarters of the way through A Cloud Cuckoo Land right now, the Doer book from last year, and the guy is just so good, and the book is just so rich. I mean, every page he can just dazzle you with just the sentences, let alone what's going on, and so you read a book like that, 3 times, or 100 books like that over the course of your lifetime, and you learn tons. So read up and don't copy.
Yeah, your first sentence of Laguna Heat is one of my favorite first sentences of all time. It's just a gorgeous first sentence.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it holds water still.
Yeah. Well, I was curious though, because you were at UC Irvine in the English program. You got a BA there?
Mm-hmm.
So had you considered the MFA program, or why did you decide to go straight into journalism?
Well, because I wanted to do what him did. I wanted to come. He didn't go to college, but he went straight into journalism early, teenager, I think, and became a really good reporter. And so I wanted to do that because I thought that newspaper writing would be the best way to learn how to write for publication, and it would get me out into the world and away from the halls of academia, colleges, that I didn't want to write a college novel. I wanted to write something else, and so it was easy to leave school that way. I felt like I'd done my homework and got my degree and all that good stuff. And I learned a ton about literature, and that UCI is a great school. And yet I didn't have a single fact, that I could say anything about in my life, and I hadn't done anything in my life. And I thought, well, get a newspaper reporter's job. At least you can see what other people are doing, So you're sort of a spy, when you're a newspaper reporter. And if you're a closet fiction writer, which I was, you're definitely a spy. I mean, I was making notes and stashing those from the first day I worked as a newspaper guy, and a lot of that has ended up in my books, So it was an easy choice for me. And yet at the same time, that from my very first day as a newspaper reporter on, I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I could tell, I just look around me and go, no, this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. I want to do it now because I have tons to learn, but I don't want to. I want to be a fiction. I want to be a novelist someday. And so I kind of approached my newspaper job with a very mercenary kind of attitude.
And the authors you cited that you were writing Laguna Heat like, at least trying to, before you found your voice, Jim Harrison, Ernest Hemingway, Raymond Chandler, literary writers and mystery writers. So did you want to write a mystery? Did you know that was going to be the first book, or were you just playing around and it just kind of happened? I mean, because genre and literary are so often divided in terms of, you know, I mean, FA programs are often all about literary fiction, except for very few.
Very true, very true. And that's a good question, you know, and the way it happened is kind of interesting. It was very specific how it happened that I wrote Laguna Heat. And that was based on the fact that prior to Laguna Heat, I wrote a literary novel. I was just out of college, and I mean, just out of college. And it was a Bildungsroman, I guess you'd call it, a novel of learning, you know, not quite a coming of age, but kind of. And it was about a young surfer growing up in Newport Beach in a rich family, and his father absconds with the family fortune and his beautiful young secretary and vanishes from this young man's life. And so the book it's a mystery in the sense that it's a boy looking for his father, man looking for his father. But in a lesser sense, it's much more of a literary book, you know. So I wrote the book, and it was a brief little thing, 220 manuscript pages, I think. I put it in I printed it out, and I thought it was okay. And I sent it to an agent that I had met, and he was a good agent, good young agent at Delacorte Press in New York. And he read it and got back to me a couple of weeks later, and he said, "Well, Parker, you know, I can't publish this story. And nobody in New York will publish this story because people in New York don't care about surfers growing up in Newport Beach." I said, "Oh, okay, I get it, you know, that's fine." And he goes, "But, you know, to your credit, I mean, you have a little bit of talent, and you have a lot of stick-to-itiveness because you wrote the whole book. You know, most first-time writers never even finish a book, you know, so you finished the damn thing. And this is what I would do if I were you." This is Morgan talking. He said, "Get the New York Times bestseller list and start read it every Sunday and see who's reading, see what America is reading, you know, and pick out something like what you see on that list and write it, and that will give you a chance of having written something publishable." So I forget who the specifics were back then in 1980 when I was given that advice, 78 maybe, but it was. I think Robert Parker was big on that list then, and John D. MacDonald was still big and kind of fading, but still around. And there was 2 or 3 mystery guys.
What about Susan Isaacs? Was she Susan Isaacs? I think
she was
starting to publish then mysteries, funny mysteries.
She was on there. She was on there, and that was a little bit pre the great Santa Barbara writer, Sue Grafton, a little bit earlier than her. But anyway, so I picked like 3 mystery kind of authors because I'd read or heard of their work, and I'd read kind of the classic mysteries when I got out of college. You know, I'd read Chandler a little bit and you know, the others. And so I kind of had an affinity for that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to take Morgan, the editor's advice, and I'm going to write a mystery. And I'm going to set it in Laguna Beach because I had just moved there, and I was captivated by its charms, and it's going to be a father-son story because that's my father was hugely influential in my life, and so I wanted to write a father-son story, a mystery set in Laguna Beach. And that set me on my course. So I changed course. I went from being a one-time literary writer to a one-time mystery writer over the course of those 6 years. And then, I mean, the obvious question is, well, why do it again? And the you know, Laguna Heat, I was so lucky. I mean, the book did so well. I mean, it was a bestseller on the West Coast and other stores, and it was other states, and it was well reviewed. And HBO made a movie about it, one of their first, you know, entertainment movies that they made themselves. And so I naturally wanted to write another mystery, and so I did. I wrote a book called Little Saigon, which is a mystery set in the Vietnamese community in Orange County, and that book is a real hybrid. I mean, it's a literary mystery for sure. It's kind of highbrow, it's long, it's complicated, it's got a lot of kind of literary language in it, I think, and that for me was kind of a, you know, that represents a lot of what I've done my entire career. I'm basically a mystery writer. I've written a few titles that are not mysteries at all. but most of them are, and most of them have, I hope, good, solid literary underpinnings. I'm trying to hybridize the two, as all writers do. Every mystery writer is trying to bring good literary, sensibility to their stories. So I'm kind of a hybrid in that way, and it's kind of the way it worked out. If the little book about the surfer in Newport Beach if Morgan had gone, oh, I love this book, I'm going to publish it and turn that into a bestseller, I'd probably be still writing novels about surfers in Newport Beach.
Well, it's interesting though, because 1,000 Steps takes place in Newport Beach. And while it isn't specifically about a surfer, it's still, it's a Newport Beach kind of beachy read.
Yeah, it's 1,000 Steps is pure beachy read. It's pure Laguna, it's pure Southern California, it's pure Orange County. And as we talked about earlier, I think on this show, 2 weeks is a long time. I kind of forgot what we covered.
2
but
weeks ago.
as we talked about, I think it was that was a book that was inspired almost totally by my sort of infantile memories of Laguna Beach, experienced by me personally when I was 14 years old. So a lot of that, the personal history and my observations and memories and senses regarding Laguna Beach in 1968 as this scrawny little suburban boy informed that book. So it's that book comes as much from my own experience, probably more from my own experience than anything else I've ever written. I mean, I have a lot more in common with Matt Anthony, the hero of 1,000 Steps, than I ever will with Tom Shepard, who was the police detective star in Laguna Heat.
It's interesting. Well, how did you learn to plot? Because you've been commended for your intricate plots. How did you learn that?
Yeah, just repetition. I think hard work over and over again. My going in position on a novel, especially of the mystery type that I usually write, is always to make the pages turn. It sounds shallow, but it's not. And the way that I choose to do that, I hope to do that, is by action. And I don't mean car chases. I mean characters confronting each other for reasons, and the consequences of these conflicts, and then the resulting thing that goes on to build the story. I guess I've always had a phobia of writing too long and writing maybe too leisurely. So I try to write with velocity. I want things to be happening fast. And nobody would ever accuse me of writing novels that are fantastically overly nervous. I mean, I can take my time, and I will, but I like to keep the action going. And one thing that I always thought was really important in plotting was to I mean, obviously you need to have a hero who's after something and an antagonist who's in his way, but I always like the idea that you can keep the pages moving by writing well, and I think that you can do that. Like when I'm in a bookstore, I'm reading a part of a book, the first few pages to see if I want to read it or not, or buy it or not. I'll pay great attention to I'll give my full devotion to the author, for a page or two. And if I feel at the end of even a page or two that I'm in good, trustworthy hands, that this author is not going to try to bullshit me, then I will go on and read another page. And so there's a certain amount of trust I try to build up, with the authority of the language and things. And that's why when you're a novelist and you make a mistake on something, like you have the wrong caliber gun or something, just your balloon goes pop and down it comes through the sky, So you kind of got to get everything right.
Well, speaking of the first couple of pages, as a reader, that's what we're looking at, right? That's what takes you into a book or throws you out. How much attention are you paying to your first page, your first 2 pages, your first chapter? I mean, will you just go over it endlessly until you can't do anything more? Or how do you know when it's done and right?
Yeah, I just beat up on that first sentence in the first chapter, especially. I read it almost every day in the year that it takes me, say, roughly to write a book. I'll read that first page at least every day, and I'll change it, and I'll keep changing it all the way through the year. And at some point, you have to let go of it, and usually my first pages are pretty good, I mean, might get in a little trouble midway through, but the first chapter is going to be good, so yeah, and that's just repetition and beating up on it a lot. I love writing the first draft of things. I like writing that first page, and I like writing the first chapter, and I like writing the whole first draft. I mean, I really like it. Some books are not enjoyable to write, but most of them are, for me anyway. Most of them, and I enjoy that day-to-day sort of coming into the office and seeing what I've done. I always read the first chapter, first page again, like we're saying, and then I'll go forward to where I am and read what I wrote the page before that, and then I'll try to pick up on, wherever I was the day before, and I like that search. I think it's really interesting. I mean, you know this as an author yourself, a fiction maker, that you may, when you publish your short story in Palm Springs Noir, it may appear that you had that whole beautiful, complicated Nito thing all figured out ahead of time, and all you had to do was write it up, and people think that about novels too, non-writers, and because they read that way, it's like, oh, this is perfect. How did he do it? Well, he just wrote it up and, had a good outline, but and I know that's not how it happens. It changes day to day. With that short story that you wrote and the novel that I write, same thing. It's just you grow the thing, and it's kind of interesting being along. Sometimes I feel like a horseman. I feel like I'm on the back of something, and I'm just kind of hanging on. I'm just kind of riding it, and that's a wonderful feeling when the story kicks in and starts helping you write it rather than bucking you. I'm sure you know that feeling.
Do you have rituals before you start writing? Is there anything you have to do before you actually sit down?
Let's see, rituals, yeah, I do. I get up, I get dressed, I pour the coffee, I collect the dog, and in this case, he's a little kind of a mutt that I got that we adopted from a shelter in Fallbrook. Anyway, he's got a whole story, but I collect him on the leash, and we walk from the front door of the house about, I think I counted them once, it's 75 steps from the front door of my house to the door of my office. And the office is just a humble sort of metal building that I'm in right now. That's a part of it is finished off as a library and here computer and stuff like that. So I follow that, pretty religiously. And I sit down. The first thing I do with the computer is I call up the front page of the LA Times. And I these days I see what, the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians, and I'm riveted by the news, as most of us are. So, I do stuff like that. And as I, clear the fog, and then, I just go to I go to my file and I call up page 1 and I read it again for the, 100th time sometimes. And I go, okay, this is looking all right. And then I'll scroll through and if I'm lucky, I will have left the paragraph unfinished, or even the sentence. I love leaving a sentence dangling like that. The sentence is half done on Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning, you know what your job is. Well, all you have to do is finish the sentence, and so I like doing that. And so those are my rituals, and I stick to them. I'm one of those get up at the same time in the morning and do the same thing at the same time each day kind of people. The older I get, the more on time I seem to be.
Yeah, I hear you. So I remember you said, I think 2 weeks ago, you might have said when we talked that that the story for 1,000 Steps had been brewing for a while. It was the story, and actually we talked about it a year ago too, and you were looking forward to this book, working on this book and getting this book in. So does that typically happen where you're involved in a project that you know what the next one is, or a couple down the line? Are you working on something now that you were thinking of when you were working on 1,000 Steps?
Yeah, well, yeah, I am working on something now that I was thinking about. Well, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. No, that almost never happens to me. I think I mentioned 1,000 Steps to you way back before I wrote it, or I was just starting to write it, because it was clearly going to be my next book, I think. But that wasn't like a book previous or anything. It was then. I'm terrible at thinking ahead. I have clip files and notes on books I'd like to write or ideas that I think are cool, or just articles that I print and put in a box. But I don't think I've ever been midway through a book and starting to form solid ideas about what the next one's going to be. I just don't. My mind just shuts down. I do 100% concentration on that book, and I don't feel free to begin seriously speculating about the next book until 98% of the work is done on the book I'm on now. But as you know, being a published writer, the lag time between when you finish the manuscript, or what you finish the manuscript of one book and you begin, and then it's time to publish another one. I mean, that's like so much time goes by, So I'll be thinking, like, I'm finishing up this book that I'm working on now, and it'll be for next year, and I'll have another couple of months of work on it probably. And when I'm done, which will be this year, easily this year, I'll put on my thinking cap and get thinking about what I want to write about. Like this morning. I mean, I read the paper like I always do. This is Sunday, whatever the 10th, Sunday the 10th, front page LA Times story about the possibilities of the state of California being able to save its native salmon. Long scientifically based kind of article, and covers how the salmon live and what they do and how they spawn and all. It's just unbelievably beautiful stuff that a salmon can do, and then one of the articles, one of the links way down deep in the story, that the Times is great. They in the text of the story, they underline it in blue if it's a link, if it's a topic, that they have something relevant to say. I'm sure you know this. So way down in the text was some mention of the state of California's organized governmental extermination of Native Americans, genocide of Indians. And I go, oh boy. And so I clicked that and read it, and I knew most of that, but it just hit me all over again. It's like, how it hit me so hard what this place was like in 1850, and it made me want to write a book about it. I don't think I ever will. I can't see Jeff Parker writing a mystery set in 1850 with salmon and Indians in it, but
you never know.
You never know, and it makes you want to write, and
Right.
and again, not to beat a dead horse, but you read a book like Cloud Cuckoo Land, and you realize how utterly free, unconstrained you are as a writer. I mean, here he's all over, not just the map, he's all over the solar system, and he's all over the time-space continuum. Makes it look easy, and so why can't you do that? I could write about salmon if I want to. Maybe I'd rather go fishing for them, but
Well, talking about that Dwarves book, I was thinking that non-mystery writers, non-genre writers think that people who write mysteries only read mysteries, whereas I've found some of the widest readers to be mystery writers. I mean, like you're reading literary fiction, right? And so it's interesting, that genre writers can be stereotyped that way in terms of even what we read.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. I know a lot of mystery writers after all these years and stuff, and many of them are, I mean, they're erudite beyond, comparison with me. I mean, they've read so much and know so much, everything, and yet when it comes time for them to write a book, they choose that genre and they stay there because they're comfortable and they're, successful probably. And it's easy to do, but we do, I and they certainly pay a lot of attention to, to good writing, and you can find that kind of thing everywhere. There are really well written mysteries, thrillers out there, and then there are a lot of books that go, beyond that genre beautifully, and there's also books that go beyond that genre, terribly, and then they're unreadable. So there's good writing in both camps, I think.
2 weeks ago when we were on, I believe a question came through about 1,000 steps in terms of film because whoever asked the question, I think had read the book and had said, this novel has to be made into a film. So do you hear anything about that? Is that going to happen?
People say that all the time. I mean, readers say that all the time. That wasn't the first time. I said it when I finished it. I thought, oh, this is a Netflix miniseries for sure, or whatever, you know, or maybe even a movie, because it's just so visual and it's so different. You know, I thought, oh wow, this is a dazzler. Hollywood's gonna flip when they see this. And so anyway, the book is out there. I have a good Hollywood agent, you know, out there sending the book out to people and trying to get them to read it. And as my agents always tell me, you know, that my literary agents, you know, that, well, Jeff, you know, there's nothing harder in publishing than getting Hollywood to read any book, you know, let alone yours, you know. So it's like they're, you know, Hollywood's notorious for not reading, but you know, they actually do. They read everything, and if they like this book, they'll make something out of it. You know, the practical downside to making 1,000 Steps into a movie is that it's a period piece. In period, they call it period. Period in Hollywood is a pejorative term. You know, it's expensive, it's hard to do. It's much easier to shoot a contemporary-ish, you know, modern story than it is something that you know will have changed so much in, you know, half a century. You know, 1,000 Steps took place, you know, 50 years ago. You know, the story. So anyway, they'd have to recreate this whole world, make it convincing, and so that's a downside. You know, the upside to it is which is also a downside. They tell me is the upside and the downside is the same. The upside is one of the upsides is that there's no star. There's no star in 1,000 Steps. You know, the hero is a 16-year-old boy who has a paper route, crying out loud. You know, the upside is that because there's no star, we can shoot it for less. we don't have to pay $5 million to Keanu Reeves. You know, we can pay whatever, $500,000 to the next Tom Cruise dancing around and acting like he did and whatever that was when he's in his underpants and he's playing an 18-year-old kid. You know, so anyway. It's funny, yeah. Who knows what they'll do, but I hope somebody will take some interest in it. Be cool.
Well, we're going over our time, which is not a problem for me, but maybe we should close with, I have all these other things. I don't know, any advice you've received along the way that has stayed with you? You know, that maybe you got in college, or maybe from an agent, or maybe from a writer at some point that hasn't left you.
Well, you know, I can't think of a direct line verbatim, but one of the things that all my formative people, from my parents, my siblings, to my friends on up through time, have always kind of told me is that, especially, you know, first as a human being, you have to kind of believe in yourself and trust your own judgment, and as a writer, you have to do that even more. You have to believe that what you have to say or are trying to say is worthwhile, and believe in it, you know, and believe that you can do this. It's real easy to get discouraged, and not discouraged, get afraid of your next book. You know, I mean, ever since I sat down to write my second book, Little Saigon, the first question I ask myself in you know, early in the morning when I'm waddling out with my coffee and my dog is, you know, do you really think you can do this again? You know, you got away with it once. You know, do you think you can do it again? And here I am 28 books later, 27 books later. And the first thing that I'll ask myself when I sit down to write the next one is can you do this? So gotta believe in yourself. You gotta go through it. You just gotta believe that you can do it.
Well, I have to say, you know, you mentioning all those novels, I think I've read every single book of yours. I don't think I can say that about anybody else who has many novels. So I always look forward to the next one. And
I'm honored. I'm
wish
honored.
you
Thank
great
you.
good luck with this one. I mean, it's already gotten so many wonderful reviews, and, you know, be nice to see it in film.
Yeah, it really would. Thank you, Barbara. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank all of you for sticking with us and coming back to the YouTube channel and watching this interview with T. Jefferson Parker. His book is 1,000 Steps, and I wish I still had it in front of me as I did 2 weeks ago. You have it right there?
Oh, I do. You betcha.
Hold it up. Let's see the
It's got
cover.
such a great cover. We have to put it up
Yeah, it has such a great cover, such a great cover.
here. There it
Yeah,
is.
wonderful. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everybody who has, everyone who's been watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Until next time.
All right, sounds good.